The sky burned crimson over the Nevada desert as Captain Sarah Chen stared through her command viewport. The experimental M88 Chimera tank beneath her hummed with a sound unlike any previous generation of armored vehicle, the fusion of human engineering and reverse-engineered alien tech, creating a distinctive resonance that had become the soundtrack of humanity's desperate resistance. Contact, multiple signatures, bearing 030. Lieutenant Mike Rodriguez called from the sensor station. His dark eyes remained fixed on the holographic display, fingers dancing across the interface. They're using the same approach vector as yesterday's attack. Sarah's jaw tightened. The Vraxian forces had been probing their defenses for weeks, testing the effectiveness of humanity's newest weapons. Each engagement had been a lesson written in blood and burning metal. How many? 8 hover tanks, ma'am. Signature matches their Helios-class assault vehicles. Through the viewport, Sarah watched as the morning haze parted, revealing the sleek, almost organic forms of the alien vehicles. They moved like predatory fish through water, their golden hulls reflecting the sunrise. Beautiful and deadly. That was the Vraxian way. All units, this is Ironclad Actual. Sarah broadcast to her squadron. Remember your training. Their shields can't maintain full coverage while they're firing. Wait for the gaps. She switched to her internal comm. Travis, is the new targeting system calibrated? Yes, Mom. Corporal Travis Wells responded from the gunner's position. Mark VI computer is tracking shield fluctuations. Give the word and we'll show these aliens why Earth tanks still roll on treads. The Chimera's systems pulsed as Sarah activated their own shield array, another piece of hybrid technology that had kept them alive through the past 3 months of combat. The aliens had expected an easy conquest when they first arrived, their hovering vessels and energy weapons making quick work of conventional military forces. But humanity had always excelled at adaptation. They're charging weapons, Rodriguez reported. Energy signatures climbing. Sarah watched as the lead Helios tank's primary cannon began to glow with that familiar azure light. All units, execute pattern Delta. Hit them where they think they're strongest. The Chimera's treads bit into the desert floor as Sarah's squadron of 5 tanks broke formation. Their movement seemed clumsy compared to the hovering alien vessels, but there was method in their apparent weakness. The Vraxians had learned to fear what they'd initially dismissed as primitive. The alien forces opened fire, streams of plasma cutting through the morning air. But Sarah's units were already executing their carefully choreographed dance, each blast hitting nothing but empty desert. The aliens' superior mobility came with a cost. Their targeting systems struggled with opponents that hugged the terrain, using the natural contours of Earth itself as both shield and weapon. Shield gap detected on target 3, Travis announced. Firing solution locked. Sarah allowed herself a tight smile. Send our regards. The Chimera's main gun roared, but instead of conventional rounds, it launched something the Vraxians hadn't encountered before today. The projectile burst just before impact, releasing a cloud of specialized nanites, microscopic machines designed to interface with and disrupt alien shield harmonics. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Helios tank's shields flickered and failed, its golden hull suddenly exposed. Before it could recover, 3 more rounds from Sarah's squadron found their mark. The alien vehicle erupted in a spectacular display of blue-white fire. 1 down, Rodriguez called out. The others are adjusting their formation. They're learning. They always do, Sarah replied. But so do we. All units, switch to Phase 2. Show them why we called this Operation Thunderstrike. Across the battlefield, the remaining Chimeras activated their secondary weapon systems. The desert floor began to vibrate as subsonic frequencies targeted the exact resonance of Vraxian hover technology. It was a weapon born of Earth's own geologic activity, a fact that would have amused Sarah if the stakes weren't so high. 2 more alien tanks faltered, their hover systems disrupted just long enough for precisely aimed shots to find their marks. The remaining Vraxian forces began to retreat, but Sarah knew better than to celebrate. This was just another probe, another test. The real battle was still to come. As the alien vessels disappeared over the horizon, Sarah opened a channel to command. Ironclad actual reporting. Engagement successful. 3 enemy vehicles confirmed destroyed. No casualties on our side. But, sir, she paused, considering her next words carefully. They're adapting faster now. These weren't the same tactics they used yesterday. The response came back, crackling with static. Understood, Captain. Get your after-action report filed and your units ready. Intel suggests they're massing for something big. Whatever they're planning, your chimeras are our best line of defense. Sarah acknowledged the order and closed the channel. Looking out over the battlefield, she could see the burning wreckage of the Vraxian tanks, their once beautiful hulls now twisted and scarred. They were a reminder of both humanity's ingenuity and the cost of survival. Travis, Rodriguez, get the systems diagnostic started. I want every weapon and sensor at 100% within the hour. Whatever's coming next, we need to be ready. As her crew began their work, Sarah studied the horizon where the alien forces had disappeared. Humanity had surprised the Vraxians with their ability to adapt and overcome, but she knew the aliens would return with new tactics, new weapons. It was a deadly game of technological leapfrog, with Earth's survival as the prize. The Chimera's systems hummed beneath her, a sound that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. They had won today's battle, but the war was far from over. And somewhere out there, the Vraxians were planning their next move. Sarah Chen and her Iron Legion would be ready. 3 days after their successful defense, Sarah Chen stood in the underground command center of Firebase Echo, studying the holographic battle map with growing concern. Red markers indicating Vraxian forces had been multiplying across the display at an alarming rate. They're not even trying to hide their movements anymore, Colonel Harrison remarked, his weathered face illuminated by the map's glow. Every surviving satellite shows the same thing. They're converging on the North American shield wall. Sarah traced the line of defensive positions that stretched from Mexico to Canada. The shield wall represented humanity's last major line of defense, a network of hardened bunkers and experimental weapon platforms. Her Chimera squadron protected one of its most vulnerable sections. What changed? She asked. The Vraxians have always been cautious, methodical. This feels different. Before the colonel could respond, the command center's AI spoke up. Analysis complete. Enemy formation patterns show a 94% match with Vraxian ceremonial war protocols described in the data we recovered last month. Rodriguez, who had followed Sarah to the briefing, straightened in his chair. Ceremonial? You mean they're not just fighting us? They're putting on a show. Correct, the AI continued. According to recovered data, Vraxian military operations of this scale typically indicate the presence of a high-ranking noble commander. Sarah felt her blood run cold. The Vraxians weren't just sending their regular forces anymore. They were sending their elite. Someone important wanted Earth, and they wanted it badly enough to lead from the front. The command center's warning system suddenly flared to life. Multiple dimensional ruptures detected. Vraxian ships emerging in low orbit. The holographic display shifted, showing a cascade of new contacts appearing above the atmosphere. But these weren't the usual dropships and support craft. These were massive vessels, their designs more ornate and threatening than anything they'd encountered before. All units, battle stations. Colonel Harrison's voice boomed through the facility. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Sarah was already running for the vehicle bay, Rodriguez close behind. The Chimera's crew had drilled for this countless times, but the real thing always felt different. As they reached their tank, Travis was already performing the pre-combat checklist. Main guns charge, shield harmonics optimized for the new frequencies. Travis reported as Sarah dropped into her command station. But Captain, you need to see this. The tactical display showed something new. The Vraxian hover tanks were moving in formations they'd never seen before, creating complex geometric patterns that seem to enhance their shield strength. They've adapted to our subsonic attacks, Rodriguez confirmed from his station. Standard disruption frequencies aren't going to work anymore. Sarah activated the squadron channel. Iron Legion, this is actual. We're dealing with a new player on the field. Stay tight, stay smart, and remember, they might have better tech, but we know our ground. The Earth trembled as the first wave of alien forces hit the shield wall. Energy weapons painted the sky in apocalyptic colors, while human railguns and plasma cannons answered in kind. Through her viewport, Sarah watched as massive Vraxian walkers emerged from their landing craft, each one larger than a city block. New contact. Rodriguez called out. Something's different. Energy readings are off the charts. Sarah's display focused on a particular Vraxian vessel, more elegant and deadly than its companions. Its hull bore markings that the computer quickly identified as symbols of high rank. As she watched, the vessel's sides opened like a blooming flower, revealing a sight that made her breath catch. It was a hover tank unlike any they'd encountered, larger, more sophisticated, its golden hull adorned with what looked like living crystal. At its helm stood a figure visible through a transparent command dome. Tall, regal, with iridescent scales that caught the light. The noble commander had arrived. Iron Legion, form up on me, Sarah ordered, her mind racing through tactical options. Standard protocols are out the window. From here on, we improvise. The chimeras moved into position just as the noble commander's tank descended to the battlefield. Its presence seemed to energize the other Vraxian forces, their attacks becoming more coordinated, more precise. "Ma'am." Travis's voice was tense. "That tank's shield configuration. It's like nothing we've seen. None of our current weapons are going to get through." Sarah watched as the alien commander's vehicle effortlessly destroyed two human defensive positions, but something about its movement caught her eye. A subtle pattern, a rhythm to its attacks. Rodriguez, run a full-spectrum analysis on that tank's shield modulation. Travis, I want you to plot its attack patterns. There's always a weakness. We just need to think like them to find it. As her crew worked, Sarah opened a channel to the other Chimera commanders. All units, close observation protocols in effect. We're not here to win this fight. We're here to learn. Watch how they move, how they fight. The Vraxians want to make this a ceremony. Fine. Let's study the dance. The battle raged on, the shield wall holding despite increasing damage. Sarah's squadron conducted a fighting retreat, gathering data with every exchange. The noble commander's forces pressed their advantage, but in doing so, they revealed more about their tactics and technology than they realized. Hours later, as the sun set on a scared battlefield, Sarah stood in the command center once again. The day's losses had been heavy, but they had survived. More importantly, they had learned. Their ceremonial patterns aren't just for show, she explained to Colonel Harrison, pointing to the analysis results. They're part of their combat doctrine. Every movement, every formation has meaning. And meaning can be predicted, Harrison finished, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Sarah nodded. We've been fighting them like we fight human enemies. That ends now. If they want to make this a ceremony, we'll learn their rituals, and then we'll show them some of our own. As if in response to her words, the noble commander's vessel appeared on their long-range sensors, its crystalline weapons charging for another assault. But this time, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The real battle was just beginning, and humanity had no intention of playing the role of sacrificial offering in anyone's ceremony. The Vraxians had brought their elite to Earth, expecting a glorious conquest. Instead, they were about to learn why humans had survived every catastrophe their world had thrown at them. The Iron Legion would make sure of that. Deep beneath the Nevada desert, in a facility known only as the Forge, Sarah Chen watched as technicians swarmed over her Chimera tank. The vehicle's hull had been stripped open, exposing a maze of human and alien technology that glowed with an otherworldly light. The integration is at 87%, Dr. Emily Winters announced, her augmented reality display casting blue reflections across her face. We've successfully merged the ceremonial frequency patterns into the targeting systems. 2 weeks had passed since the noble commander's arrival, 2 weeks of studying every second of combat footage, every scrap of sensor data. The Vraxians' ritualistic combat patterns had proved to be both their greatest strength and potentially their greatest vulnerability. "Show me," Sarah ordered, stepping closer to her modified tank. Dr. Winters gestured, and a holographic display sprang to life above the chimera. It showed the complex mathematical patterns that govern Vraxian battle formations, patterns that now resided in the tank's combat computer. "Your targeting system won't just predict their movements," Emily explained. "It will anticipate their ceremonial responses. Every Vraxian counterattack, every defensive formation, they're all part of their ancient combat liturgy. And now we know their prayers," Sarah finished. She ran her hand along the chimera's modified hull, feeling the subtle vibration of new technology coming to life. "Have the other units been upgraded?" "All 5 remaining chimeras in your squadron are ready." "But Captain," Emily hesitated, "there's something else you need to see." The scientist led Sarah to a secured section of the forge. Through a reinforced window, she could see what looked like a Vraxian hover tank, but heavily modified with human technology. Its once golden hull was now a deep slate gray, covered in angular plates that seemed to drink in the light. "Project Phantom," Emily said proudly. "We've recreated their hover technology, but with a twist. Instead of trying to match their shield strength, we've gone in the opposite direction. This tank doesn't just evade their targeting systems, it's practically invisible to their ceremonial combat protocols." Sarah studied the vehicle with a mixture of awe and anticipation. "How many?" 3 prototypes ready for combat. Combined with your modified chimeras, you'll have 8 units total. Not much against their numbers, but enough to change the rules of engagement," Sarah finished. She turned as heavy footsteps approached, seeing Colonel Harrison arrive with Rodriguez and Travis in tow. "Captain," Harrison nodded grimly, "I assume Dr. Winters has briefed you on our new toys." "Good, because we're going to need them. Intel just confirmed our worst fears. The noble commander isn't just here for a show of force. They're preparing to access the Earth's core." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "The core? Why?" "Our geologists finally figured it out." Rodriguez stepped forward, pulling up a data display. "Earth's core composition is unique in this sector of space. The Vraxians don't want our planet. They want what's inside it. And their ceremonial warfare. It's not just tradition. The geometric patterns their formations create, they're like massive resonance devices. They're trying to crack our planet like an egg," Travis added quietly. Harrison's face was grim. "We've detected energy buildups at their main staging area. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon. The shield wall won't hold against a concentrated attack, not with their numbers. We need to strike first." Sarah looked back at the modified vehicles, the upgraded chimeras, and the phantom tanks that represented humanity's best chance at survival. "Then let's give them a ceremony they'll never forget. How soon can we move?" "Dawn," Harrison replied. "We've already begun evacuating civilian populations deeper underground. Every other combat-capable unit is being repositioned to support your attack. The Iron Legion will spearhead the offensive." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah's crews familiarized themselves with their modified vehicles, while combat engineers finalized weapon systems and shield harmonics. The plan was audacious. Use the Vraxians' own ceremonial patterns against them while the phantom tanks disrupted their formations from within. As the first hint of sunrise touched the eastern sky, Sarah stood before her assembled crews. 8 tanks, 24 crew members, carrying the hopes of an entire planet. The Vraxians came here expecting to find primitive warriors, she began, her voice carrying across the vehicle bay. They thought their ceremonies and traditions made them invincible, But they forgot something crucial about humanity. We don't just adapt, we evolve. We take what our enemies throw at us and turn it into something new. She gestured to their modified vehicles. These machines represent the best of both worlds, human ingenuity and alien technology. We've learned their dances, studied their rituals. Now it's time to teach them some of ours. The crews moved to their vehicles as alert klaxons began to sound. Long-range sensors had detected massive energy buildups at the Vraxian staging area. The enemy was preparing their planet-cracking ceremony. Iron Legion, form up, Sarah ordered as she settled into her command station. Phantom units, you know your positions. Remember, they expect us to fight like humans. Let's show them how humans really fight when everything is on the line. The tank bay doors opened to reveal a blood-red dawn. Satellite imagery showed hundreds of Vraxian vehicles moving into their ceremonial formations, their patterns already beginning to resonate with the Earth's core. At their center, the noble commander's crystalline tank pulsed with growing power. All units, advance, Sarah commanded, feeling the familiar hum of the chimera's systems around her. Let's crash their party. The Iron Legion moved out, 8 vehicles against an army. But as they approached the Vraxian lines, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The aliens had brought their ceremonies and traditions to Earth, expecting an easy conquest. Instead, they were about to learn why humans had remained undefeated on their home ground for millions of years. The counter-strike had begun. The desert floor trembled as the Iron Legion advanced toward the massive Vraxian formation. Through her command viewport, Sarah watched the alien vehicles arrange themselves in intricate geometric patterns, their golden hulls catching the morning light like a field of metallic flowers. Energy readings are off the scale, Rodriguez reported, his voice tense. They're channeling power directly into the ground. Seismic sensors showing increasing resonance with Earth's core. Sarah activated the Chimera's new targeting system, watching as holographic overlays appeared across her view. The alien formations were no longer just positions on a battlefield. They were now mathematical equations, each movement part of a complex ceremony that their computers could predict and counter. Phantom units, execute Protocol Shadow, she ordered. Main force, prepare for pattern disruption Alpha. The 3 Phantom tanks shimmered and seemed to fade from view, their modified hulls bending light and energy around them. They moved like ghosts through the battlefield, invisible to Vraxian sensors that were calibrated to detect only ceremonially correct patterns. As the Iron Legion closed to engagement range, the noble commander's crystalline tank rose above its forces. Its command dome pulsed with ethereal light as it broadcast a message in perfect English. Humans, your resistance, while admirable, is ultimately futile. Stand aside and witness the great harvesting. This ceremony has been performed on 1,000 worlds. Your core will fuel our civilization for millennia to come. Sarah switched to an open channel. Interesting proposal. Here's our counteroffer. She gave the signal, and the Phantom tanks struck. They materialized inside the Vraxian formation like avenging spirits, their modified weapons disrupting the carefully maintained geometric patterns. The effect was immediate and devastating. The energy being channeled into the Earth's core fluctuated wildly. Their formations are destabilizing, Rodriguez called out. Main ceremonial pattern at 60% efficiency and dropping. The noble commander's response was swift and furious. Dozens of hover tanks broke formation to engage the Phantom units, but in doing so, they further disrupted their own ceremony. It was like watching a perfectly choreographed dance dissolve into chaos. Main force, advance. Sarah ordered. Show them what we've learned. The 5 modified chimeras moved forward in their own formation, one that mimicked Vraxian patterns but with subtle, crucial differences. Their weapons fired in sequences that matched alien ceremonial rhythms, but with human unpredictability woven in. Target response is exactly as predicted, Travis reported from the gunner station. Their shields are trying to adapt to our mock ceremonies, but the variations are creating weak points. Through her viewport, Sarah watched as the battlefield transformed into something unprecedented, a fusion of human and alien combat doctrine. The Vraxians struggled to maintain their traditional formations while defending against an enemy that both honored and violated their sacred combat patterns. But the noble commander was far from defeated. Its crystalline tank descended to the battlefield like an avenging deity, its weapon systems reconfiguring in ways their intelligence had never suggested possible. New energy signature detected. Rodriguez's voice was almost drowned out by sudden warning klaxons. They're changing the ceremony. Sarah watched in horror as the remaining Vraxian tanks began moving in new patterns, ones their computers couldn't predict. The noble commander wasn't just fighting back. It was creating new ceremonial forms on the fly, adapting their ancient traditions in ways that should have been impossible. All units, fall back to secondary positions, Sarah ordered, but it was too late. Two of the Phantom tanks were caught in a crossfire of ceremonial energy patterns, their advanced stealth systems overloaded. One exploded immediately. The other spun out of control before crashing into the desert floor. The noble commander's voice came through again, this time with an edge of genuine respect. You understand our ways better than any species we have encountered. But understanding is not mastery. Witness true innovation. The remaining Vraxian forces began moving in increasingly complex patterns, each formation building on the last in an evolving dance of destruction. Earth's core responded, tremors increasing in intensity as the ceremony reached new levels of power. "Captain," Rodriguez called out, "I'm detecting something strange in these new patterns. They're not just ceremonial anymore. The energy signatures, they're becoming unstable." "Exactly," Sarah replied, a plan forming in her mind. They've spent thousands of years perfecting these ceremonies, making them precise, controlled. But now, they're improvising, and improvisation. She allowed herself a grim smile. That's human territory. She opened a channel to the remaining Phantom tank. "Shadow 3, I need you to get as close to the noble commander's position as possible. Prepare to transmit the following energy patterns." The battle had reached its turning point, but not in the way anyone had expected. The Vraxians had brought their ceremonies to Earth, then adapted them in the face of human resistance. Now they would learn why some dances were never meant to be changed. Sarah Chen and the Iron Legion prepared to execute their final gambit. The fate of Earth would depend not on who had the strongest ceremonies, but on who best understood the price of breaking them. The desert had become a maelstrom of energy and chaos. Geometric patterns of light carved themselves into the ground as the noble commander's improvised ceremonies sent waves of power drilling toward Earth's core. The air itself seemed to vibrate with competing frequencies, alien tradition clashing with desperate innovation. Pattern instability at critical levels, Rodriguez reported, his voice steady despite the tremors racking their chimera. The noble commander's new formations are creating cascade failures throughout their entire ceremonial network. Sarah watched through her command viewport as fissures of light spread across the battlefield. The Vraxian forces were caught between their ancient doctrine and their commander's desperate improvisations. It was like watching a perfectly tuned instrument trying to play two different songs at once. "Shadow 3, are you in position?" she asked, knowing their remaining Phantom tank was their last chance. "Affirmative, Captain," came the response, distorted by interference. "But our stealth systems are failing. These energy levels are off the charts." Sarah took a deep breath, remembering Dr. Winter's words from their last briefing. Sometimes the most devastating counter to a perfect pattern is an imperfect one. "All units, execute final protocol," she ordered. "Transmit the modified ceremonial frequencies. Now." The remaining tanks of the Iron Legion began broadcasting energy patterns that mimicked Vraxian ceremonies, but with crucial distortions. They weren't trying to disrupt the aliens' patterns anymore. They were amplifying the instabilities that the noble commander's improvisations had created. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The carefully maintained geometric formations of the Vraxian army began to shimmer and warp. Their ceremonial energy patterns, already strained by adaptation, started to resonate in ways their creators had never intended. "Your attempts to mock our sacred combat forms will fail," the noble commander's voice boomed across the battlefield. But there was something new in that voice now: uncertainty. "We're not mocking them," Sarah responded on an open channel. "We're showing you their truth. You broke faith with your own ceremonies. We're just helping them break completely." The noble commander's crystalline tank rose higher, its weapons charging for what looked like a final devastating attack. But before it could fire, the ground beneath it erupted with geometric light patterns. The earth itself seemed to be responding to the chaos of competing ceremonies. "Energy backlash detected," Rodriguez shouted. "The ceremonial patterns are reflecting back through their own network." Sarah watched as the carefully organized Braxian formations began to collapse. Hover tanks spun out of control as their ceremonial guidance systems received contradictory inputs. The noble commander's vehicle, at the center of it all, became the focus of converging energy patterns that its own innovations had unleashed. "Your species," the noble commander's voice came through once more, now filled with something that sounded almost like wonder. "You didn't just study our ceremonies. You understood why they must remain unchanged. The price of perfection is the inability to adapt," Sarah finished. "But humans, we've never been perfect. That's our strength." The battlefield erupted in a display of geometric light that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. The noble commander's tank, caught in the nexus of conflicting ceremonial energies, began to break apart. But instead of trying to escape, the alien commander did something unexpected. It began to laugh. "In 1,000 worlds, none have ever." The transmission cut off as the crystalline tank imploded, taking with it the heart of the Vraxian ceremonial network. The effect rippled outward like a stone dropped in a pond. Hover tanks fell from the sky as their ceremonial power sources failed. The complex energy patterns drilling toward Earth's core dissipated, leaving only scorched geometric designs carved into the desert floor. "Status report," Sarah called out, her ears ringing in the sudden silence. "Vraxian forces in full retreat," Rodriguez responded. "Their remaining ships are breaking orbit. Energy readings returning to normal levels. The core is stable." Sarah opened a channel to all surviving human forces. "This is Iron Legion Actual. The enemy is retreating. I repeat, the enemy is retreating. Earth's core is secure." As the dust settled over the battlefield, Sarah emerged from her chimera to survey the aftermath. The desert was littered with disabled alien vehicles, their golden hulls now dull and lifeless. But among the wreckage, something caught her eye. A single piece of crystal from the noble commander's tank, still pulsing with faint light. She picked it up carefully, feeling its resonance with energies she was only beginning to understand. In its faceted surface, she could see both the rigid perfection of Vraxian ceremonies and the chaotic potential of human adaptation. Dr. Winters arrived at the battlefield hours later, her research team eager to study the defeated alien technology. She found Sarah still holding the crystal fragment. "They'll be back, won't they?" Sarah asked, not taking her eyes off the crystal. "Perhaps," Emily replied, "but not as conquerors. You didn't just defeat them, you taught them something about their own ceremonies, about the price of unchanging perfection." Sarah finally looked up at the sky, where the last Braxian ships were vanishing into the distance. "Then next time, maybe they'll come to learn instead of harvest, and we'll have some new dances to show them." The crystal in her hand pulsed one final time, as if in agreement. Humanity had faced its greatest trial and emerged not just victorious, but transformed. They had learned the power of ceremony and tradition, while teaching the Vraxians the strength found in imperfection and adaptation. As the sun set on the battlefield, the modified chimeras of the Iron Legion stood guard over their hard-won victory. They were no longer just tanks, no longer just weapons. They had become symbols of humanity's greatest strength, the ability to take the old and the new, the perfect and the flawed, and forge them into something unprecedented. The Earth was safe, its core untouched. But more importantly, its defenders had proven that in the dance between tradition and innovation, the most powerful steps are often the ones that break the pattern.